We moved here from Robertsville when I was 4.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if you know where Mrs. Myers, Laverne Myers, lives down. She lives on St. Louis Street on the corner right across from the bank. You know, that was my early years down there, but we lived when the show was really big. The movie theater would have, I guess for the air conditioning in the summer, they would have the air conditioning water would run down this alley or this little, it wasn't really a sewer, but you know, just along the edge of the road. And we used to go play what we called in the show water. I had friends that lived down, because it was small then. Back then, I guess, where McDonald's was on the outside of town. So, and this was way out. But yeah, we used to play in the show water. We'd sit, because nobody had swimming pools. Nobody had any place to go to play in the water until Fun Valley. But, so we would sit and play in the show water. But I remember, there were several of us that lived down in that little neighborhood, and where the post office is going, they had a big 2-story house there, and when they got ready to build the bank there, they put that, it was the first time I'd ever seen it, they put it up on blocks and moved it. It's up on Union Street across from that old school. That used to be the community school, I don't know what it's called now. But Frank and Gail Rogan live in it. Yeah, they moved too. There was one, then across, there was a big 2-story house across from where Mrs. Myers lives, and behind it, there was another 2-story smaller home, and they moved it up across from where the care center is now. And where the care center was a big hill, and we used to go pick strawberries there. That was the strawberry patch, Mr. Nell's strawberry patch.
I remember I talked with Ruth Hogan.
Mm-hmm.
She did an interview about how the fields used to be there and how our
yeah.
family used to go up there.
Oh yeah.
Get some fresh fruit.
And my mom, well, my dad did construction, but my mom worked out at the box factory. And one of my grandmas worked down at the shoe factory. That was, I guess it's Columbus and St. Louis Street, I think. It's across from that pool place, but that's where the shoe factory was. But my other grandmother worked where Gray's Catering is in the Quonset hut. It was a laundry. And the people who owned Dennis Oliver's building, I can see him, Miller's, Edith Miller. Edith and her husband had that gas station, but they also owned that Quonset hut, and they had a laundry in there where they washed and dried and did all that stuff. But that 66 was a main highway, so you couldn't just walk there. And I used to go with my grandma. We took the taxi.
And what was you said the Millers owned, it was a gas station?
It was a gas station, but it was also a sandwich shop. And they did a big business because there wasn't, it was along Route 66. And back then, Route 66, this is the 50s, so, it was a big thing back then. So, but they owned that, and then they owned that laundry. And my grandma and I would get in a taxi every day with Don Mercado. He was a young boy back then, and he'd drive us there and then come pick us up and take us back to where she lived. So yeah, I have a lot of good memories of town, and it was small back then. I remember when they built the plaza down here. It was like, oh my gosh, this is a big deal. So, but yeah, and my mom worked we got penny candy. I'm sure you've heard about penny candy and the baker,
Gross Bakery.
Yeah, Mr. Gross's Bakery. You could buy all those little, things that, those soda bottles that were wax lips, all that kind of stuff. He had all that penny candy in there. And then, oh my gosh, Mr. and Mrs. Leah along there. I'm sure you've talked to Vicky, their daughter. They had a big business. And who else was along there? Sanger's had the 5 and 10. It was like Ben Franklin. And then you know, I mean, when I was really little, I remember we had two banks down there, but they also had, you know, they just had everything downtown.
What other older businesses, like you mentioned Ida's, do you have any older businesses that you experienced that might no longer be around?
Well, along that main street there, along St. Louis Street, besides Leah's department store, there was where Brown Jerry's is now. There was Grace Harrell's clothing store, and Grace owned the what we always called the Pink House, but it's on First and Route 66, Osage on First Street there. I think it's an insurance office now. And she finally moved her business into her home there. But she had the business down, you know, years ago, or part of it. Now, part of it was still the bar. The bar was Billman's Tavern. But yeah, that and over where Christopher's Corner is, there was a bar there called Harvey's Bar. And his wife Butch, her name was Dorothy, but they always called her Butchie. Butch and Harvey's, and we would go over there because he frequented those bars, and back then it was okay for kids to be in them. Those kind. Now, there were other bars. There was a lot of bars in Pacific, and some of them I didn't go in, but and then Mr. Murphy, who was, along there, Sandstone bought up a lot of buildings, but along St. Louis Street, just down from the coffee shop, where the woman who owns the Airbnbs, she has her cleaning business in there. Well, that used to be Murphy's Bar, and it was just a little family wooden floored bar. Nicest place ever. So there were a lot of businesses, and you know, just up and down St. Louis Street was all kinds of things. So, you know, at one point, Sears was in where Kaleidoscope is. Kroger was in where Kaleidoscope is. Western Auto was down where there's apartments at Columbus, and I don't know what it's St. Louis Street, but it's probably not Columbus, maybe Olive, or back up.
It's the two apartment buildings. There's two of them.
Yeah, and it's at the end of this. You know, it's down, but that used to be Western Auto in there, and before that it was Schneider's Grocery. Schneider started there, then they went to where Lou's Pool is. And then they went down, built this new plaza, and went down there. Then they ended up at the west end of town before they sold to B&H or whatever it was.
Yeah. Queens?
Yeah, but it was something before that too. So, yeah, but they moved through town though. But yeah, it was pretty neat. So, I mean, we just were used to it because it was little. We were free to run wild, and I mean, you know, our parents never worried about us because it wasn't like today. You know, now I have kids that I won't let go out in the front yard unless I'm with them.
Tell me about, you know, just your perspective of, you know, with Route 66, you know, it was the main thoroughfare, so it was very busy. What was it like when that started to fade? You know, the Route 66 kind of died down. Did you notice any like immediate changes, or?
I don't think so. At that time, when it was really busy, where Subway is now, there was a stoplight at the corner where Subway is. That whatever Columbus and whatever, and so traffic would stop, and at 11 o'clock the light went to yellow, flashing all the time. But we lived in what I told you the insurance company was. We lived in that pink house. We lived all over town. My parents rented, and we would just move. We lived all over town. But we lived in that pink house, and we would sit out on that has a big front porch, and we'd sit out there and pull for the trucks to honk at us. Yeah. And I remember, I guess, I don't really remember because by the time the interstate really got going, I was a teenager already and could care less about what traffic there was. But yeah. But But as a child, it was fun, and then you could tell that it was growing. You know, Cottrell's came in, they started an ice cream shop about where BP maybe is, in that area, and then they built Cottrell's restaurant, and
Where was Cottrell's restaurant at?
it's where BP and Taco Bell.
Taco Bell around there.
Yeah, right in there, because it was a fancy restaurant in its time. And then Dorit's was on up where Joe Pig's Pets were. But, you know, that was so far out of town though. And there was a country club at where Lamar Parkway is, was a big country club. And only the elite went to the country club naturally. And then, you know, the Bushers owned Fun Valley Lake. And I mean, that was a huge business back then. We always, everybody went to Fun Valley. I think our parents sent us there as babysitters. You know, we pretty much were sent there. You go swim all day and come home in the night. But you're out there, do whatever.
Where was Fun Valley at?
Do you know where Lake Cattails is?
Huh.
There. That lake, it was Fun Valley Lake, and there was a huge beach. It was huge. You swam in the lake. You had, it had like picnic tables and snack bars. It was the happening place. They would have dances, at that time I was younger, but the older kids, they had a lot of teen dances, and there were a lot of activities for kids. Even when I was a teenager, Pacific had a lot of activities. We would have, CYC was big back then, and we would go to CYC dances about every weekend. So, yeah, it was just small town living is what it was. And, you know, I miss that, but, I mean, progress comes, so. I mean, you know, it was like the east end of town had Red Cedar, and the west end had Cottrell's, and in between was just free reign. So, but yeah, we pretty much ran the streets. I went to Pacific. I started at the little school. They didn't have kindergarten back then, but I started at that school on Union Street that I don't even know what the name of it is. And then I went through 6th grade, and then 7th and 8th, they had added on to the high school, which is now Pi. They had added on the north end, I guess. Added just 4 classrooms to put 7th and 8th grade. And then for my freshman year, they moved everybody back to the community school. And then when I got in high school, we went to that building. Now, but I graduated from there, so yeah.
And what about, work-wise? Where did you
I worked
work
at Hoffman's. I was a car helper from the time I was probably 14. And Hoffman's was a happening place too because of the racetrack out in Catawissa. Every weekend there was car races out there. The Nike base was out there, and the soldiers, coming to town, they ate there. And so that's where I met my husband.
Really? Tell me that story. How'd you meet?
Well, I don't think I was working there, but I was hanging out there because that's what you did. You hung out. And he came in with somebody, and I had an older brother. My brother was 6 years older than I, and so by the time I was 16 and old enough to drive, his friends all had nice cars, and I would beg them to let me drive them. And stupidly they did. Don't ask why. He came in with some other people, and he had a nice car, and I thought, he must be rich. He saw me 2 or 3 times and thought I was rich. And then, I don't know, we just hooked up from there, and neither one of us were rich. We were both as poor as could be, but yeah, that's how we met at Hoffman's. And then he left and went from this Nike base up to Chicago. And it was his job. He went around closing down Nike missile bases. That's what he did.
That took them all over.
Well, yeah, they had like 4 in St. Louis, and he closed down all of those. I mean, he went from one to another, and then he went up to Chicago and closed down, I guess, 3, and then he got out. So when we first got married, we lived up there.
There.
So
When did you move back here?
he got out of the Army probably in 1971, maybe. I mean, we were only up there for a couple of years. So.
And did you move into the house that you're at now, or?
Oh, no, my parents, like I said, my dad was something else. But my dad rented. He was really good friends with Bob Billman that owned Bob's Tap Room. And Bob Billman owned the old Mothy House, which is up on First Street. You know, it's that straight up brick building. So my dad leased that building from Bob for $70 a month. And we lived in the bottom half, and the upstairs he rented out for $80 a month. So he made $10 every month. And so when we moved home, we lived upstairs over them at first, and then we lived, I don't know, we lived in different places. And then we ended up out in Catawissa for a while, and finally, but you know, we have adult sons that are disabled, and basically we owed on them forever. So we ended up in Hawthorne finally. So yeah, and then we moved to the house we're in now. So that's an old house. Ed saw a plat from, I guess, the city of Pacific in 1880, and our house is on it. Our house and the two houses beside us are on that map. So we knew, I think the tax records go back to 1865, and our house was already built then, so nobody really knows how old it is. But it's pretty old. I remember hearing stories about the railroad, and you'd have to ask Pauline about that, but the same family always owned it up until Scott Wolf from Wolf Hardware bought it at an auction because the family finally died off. It was the Strawmans. Mr. Strawman, Mr. Strawman was an interesting man. He had a business called Strawman Electric where that decor or deluxe draperies was on a corner. And I'm not sure exactly what he had to do with it, but he brought electricity to Pacific and owned a piece of it and, got residuals for a really long time. I guess until it finally turned over to somebody else. I'm not sure how that worked, but yeah, that's who owned that house. His family built it, and then and his father, I guess, built he was the one who started the electric thing. But then, Mr. Charlie was the last one, and when he died, he was single, and when he died, they auctioned the house off at a sale, and Scott Wolf bought it, and then he needed money for whatever and sold it, and we bought it then. So yeah, there's a lot of history down there. It's like in the cigar vault where the vault itself is, and we saw it when the gun owner had it, and he opened it up, and I remember when it was a bank. I can't remember which bank it was, and then the bank where where the pharmacy was, that was a bank for a long time. And then it turned into Rao Rexall. It was a Rexall drugstore, and they had a soda counter along it. So, my family moved from Robertsville. My great-grandmother had a house in Robertsville, and basically it was back, I guess, when the stock market crashed and nobody had any money. But they had a farm, and they did very well. They weren't rich people to lose everything, but they had a farm, and they took in other people's kids, people who maybe had to go to St. Louis to work or leave. So they raised a lot of kids besides their own. And, for years we would run into people, and they go, "Oh, we're related." And I go, "I don't think so." And I remember asking my mom one time, I said, "How are we related to these people?" And she said, "Well, you're really not. They were raised with, so." But yeah, they lived out on what's called the beginning of Merrimack Terrace out there. So before you went out all the way to, back then you could go to Moselle that way, but then the bridge burned, I think. So, but yeah, it's just, so I have a lot of history here. And we, every Friday night we go to the show, and we just did whatever kids do back then. I mean, it was the typical small town. You'd go from Hoffman's, you'd go up the road, then you'd turn around and come back and drive back and forth. So,
It's definitely changed.
yeah. And then we'd go, in the summer, we'd go up to Washington to the fair every year. So yeah. I don't remember, other than Kroger's, what was on the other side of the street. All of the businesses seemed to be on the north side, along there. From all the way from the drugstore down, it was just business after business with Whitlock's Jewelry and, everything. And, eventually up the street, where the library is, that was Tom Wolf Hardware. Or Wolf Hardware, it wasn't Tom's, it was his dad. Yeah, his mom and his sister ran the other one for years. They were competing. For years they competed. So, and then Brad Reed has his insurance company, that was a gas station, and then the train station was where the train depot thing is. That was called Smith's Confectionery, and they were like a little sandwich shop. Soda. They had a counter, that you could go in and get something. And there's been a lot of businesses in it too.
I remember that, a lot of different businesses.
There was a candy store in there for a while.
There was also a donut shop at one point for
I think so, yeah, for a short time. I don't know what else was along there. I don't know. Oh, and Parrots. Everybody remembers Parrots, where Dr. Burke is now. When Dr. Burke started, though, he has the pictures of the original Parrots.